Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to our webinar that is dedicated to the increasingly difficult work of international journalists in China. My name is Reinhard Bütikofer. I will be your host and your moderator today. And first of all, I would gladly welcome our two experts, two outstanding journalists who are working or have been working in China and can report from firsthand experience how the situation has been evolving and is still developing there. As it happens, and that was not planned, both of them have biographical connections to the German Southwest, where I'm also coming from. Mr. Wurzel was born in Rastatt, a famous, used to be a famous revolutionary hot point 150 years ago. And he studied in Karlsruhe history, and he started then working with Südwestrundfunk in Mainz, Baden-Baden, Stuttgart, Berlin, Washington. Later on, for the first German public channel, ARD, in Istanbul and Athens, Cairo, Johannesburg, and Shanghai. And until the end of 2021, Steffen Wurzel was the correspondent for ARD radio in Shanghai, and he reported about China's economy, politics, society, and also about Hong Kong and Macau. He reported also during his time in China about the Hong Kong protests, about the eruption of the COVID-19 pandemic in Wuhan, and about the Winter Olympic Games in Beijing. So welcome, Mr. Wurzel. You will be the first speaker.
Thank you.
Before I give you the floor, I also want to introduce Yang Xifan. Ms. Yang was born in China, but she grew up also in Baden, in Freiburg, in Breisgau, and went to the Deutsche Journalistenschule in Munich. She studied in Munich psychology, and she also worked for the Süddeutsche Zeitung, the youth magazine of the Süddeutsche Zeitung. Then she was a free correspondent in Shanghai and editor of the Süddeutsche Zeitung magazine since 2018. She is now the China correspondent for the German weekly Die Zeit in Beijing. She is also the author of a book, When the Carps Learned Flying. That's my unhappy English translation. Als die Karpfen fliegen lernten, and she has been receiving a correspondent prize, Reporter Prize 2020, for her reporting, and also the Egon Erwin Kisch Prize, two journalistic highlights in 2021. So, Mr. Wurzel, you go first, and then Ms. Yang.
Thank you, Mr. Bütikofer, for having me and for having us. I think it's an important topic, and I'm glad I'm able to talk about this very topic. Beforehand, you asked me, you raised some questions beforehand and asked me to maybe compare a little bit the situation we have in the People's Republic of China when we compare 2008, the year of the Summer Olympics in Beijing, and the year of 2022, this year where we have seen the Winter Olympic Games. And the interesting thing is, the first time I got in touch with China on a professional level was actually in 2009 to 2009, so 1 year after the Beijing Olympics. 1 year after that, when the Robert Bosch Foundation sent me to China as a so-called media ambassador. The Robert Bosch Stiftung, Robert Bosch Foundation used to have a very interesting media ambassador program where they would send German colleagues, German journalists to China and vice versa. Remarkable from today's point of view. Chinese reporters, young men and women covering Germany from German news desks. This program has been ended since 2016 for obvious reasons. This is not that easy anymore. Back then, 1 year after the Olympics, I felt that China is in a state where a lot of stakeholders in the civil society are recognizing the importance of free media, of free internet, of the upcoming trend of smartphones and so on and so forth. Not that many websites were blocked back then. I remember using Gmail, I remember using Google and Google Maps and all these things that are so useful on a regular daily basis for us in Europe, but have been blocked in China for many years now. Back then I felt for the first time that the so-called netizens, a word that was introduced to us in China back then, was really a thing in terms of people who are using the internet are raising their voices on Weibo, for instance, on other blogs and forums, basically uncensored. And that was an interesting thing. China back then was a country, definitely, where civil society stakeholders are interested in raising their voices. And there were even, almost, I would say, very courageous colleagues from newspapers back then, especially from the Guangdong area, breaking news, having scoops on a daily basis, things that we don't see today anymore. There was one thing that was affecting us as foreign journalists back then. With the Olympic Games 2008, there was a law introduced, or new regulations were introduced, that would enable foreign journalists to travel freely, relatively freely, to leave, for instance, Shanghai and Beijing on their own without asking for permission, go out to the countryside and do reports from there, for instance, from Xinjiang or from other parts that are interesting from a journalistic point of view. These rules are still in place. We are still able, on a regulations point of view, regulations level, to travel freely in China, but de facto, in reality, that's not possible anymore due to COVID regulations. They often tell us you're not able to travel because of COVID prevention. You're not able to meet people. In the past years, we have also often seen that these very old school ways of suppression are in place again. So black cars follow you, 5, 6, 7 plainclothes police officers follow you. I would say, and I'm interested in Xifan, what you think about this. There was a time 5, 6, 7 years ago, it was much more easy to travel freely in China. Mr. Bütikofer, you also raised another question that I think is an interesting one. Do you feel as German journalists supported by, for instance, embassy staff and diplomats? Me as a German citizen, I can not complain. I have always been in a very good connection with German diplomats, both on a embassy level as well as on the consul general level in Shanghai and other cities. I feel there's a great understanding of our needs and our worries and our problems on the diplomatic field. I'm very happy to answer any questions by you or by our participants online. Yeah. Thanks for now.
Thank you very much. And I would first, before we ask our participants to come in, I would first give the floor also to Yang Xifan. Please, Mrs. Yang.
Thank you, Mr. Bütikofer, for the introduction and for the opportunity to speak today. So yeah, I would agree with Steffen that the difference in working conditions compared to 10, 14 years ago is the difference of day and night, basically. Steffen, you introduced, you mentioned all the main restrictions. Of course, we have seen like increasing deterioration of working conditions starting. I personally experienced this starting 2014 and then just become worse and worse. Then we have the COVID travel restrictions imposed on us. I know many colleagues, especially those who work in breaking news or who, just breaking news, or who have to cover a much broader news agenda than I, for example, for working for a weekly, who have not left Beijing in many months. That is bad because in my experience, almost everywhere in China, you get better access to interviewees than in Beijing, because in Beijing, the political climate is so tense that people in general, no matter whether they're in business or in universities or just general people on the streets, they're much more scared to talk to people, to foreign media than elsewhere in China. Unfortunately, we are all based in Beijing. So that is very tragic that a lot of us cannot leave Beijing anymore, because chances are today that you'll just get stuck somewhere else and you cannot return to Beijing. You have to go to quarantine for 14 days and so on. Another thing that really has accelerated over the last 2 years are the specific, just the nationalist smear campaigns against foreign press per se, but also against certain individual foreign reporters. We have seen smear campaigns against, for example, BBC reporters. We have seen reporters being targeted on the ground by just pedestrian bystanders who see, like, for example, last year during the floods in Henan, when people were basically attacked by regular folks on the street because they were holding up a camera and reporting for foreign media. That is, of course, all a result of the intimidation campaign by state propaganda. Everyone who talks to foreign media now risk of being attacked as a traitor. And so therefore we have less and less people who are willing to speak to us, whether it's on or off the record. That doesn't matter. However, I would say it is not impossible to work in China yet. There's still high value to be on the ground. My experience is that if you can do in-depth reporting if you invest a lot of time. That does not apply to a lot of topics, obviously. Not, for example, I would highly doubt that the New York Times or Bloomberg could do scoops on corruption of within the highest party elite now that they could pull off a year ago. I think that kind of stories are impossible. But if you just talk about like stories, for example, political, economic changes in China, in the society, for example, how does the anti-poverty campaign go, and how are these policies implemented on the ground? In my experience, if you invest a lot of time and if you have a bit of luck, you could still do some meaningful reporting. Of course, this is all a matter of reporters' luck a lot of times. And I also do see that, for example, I personally I am a bit advantaged, as in I do not easily get discovered as a foreign spy so easily when I'm in the mountains of Sichuan, for example. That for sure is much more difficult for foreign journalists, who are easily visible as foreign. Mr. Bütikofer, you raised the question of what does it mean when Xi Jinping says that all Chinese media carry the family name party? I know a young Chinese colleague who used to study journalism in China, and she said the first thing that you learn in the university when you study journalism is that all media are the tongue of the party. So basically, you're just a tool for propaganda. That's the first thing you learned, and Steffen, you lined it out that we had this like brief golden window between 2008 and I would say maybe between 2008 and 2013 when there was an opening in the system, and people like when Weibo was full of citizen bloggers who exposed local corruption cases or environmental issues and so on, and abuse of power on a local level. That window closed soon. Now we have a situation where basically all the best Chinese reporters from like a decade ago, a generation of brilliant investigative journalists, they have all left the industry. I was wondering what they're doing now. So I asked some people in the industry. Some of them today are running tea shops, others are working for Alibaba. There's even one very famous former Chinese investigative reporter who now works in the content management department of Tencent, which means he became a censor now. So that is all very tragic, and that also, that all contributes to us as foreign journalists lacking the foundation, lacking the information on which we can base our own reporting. Steffen, did you talk about the expulsions of the New York Times colleagues and so on?
No, not yet.
We
Okay.
haven't. Please do.
Okay, I would say these two factors. First, like basically the death of Chinese journalism, and then also the collapse of China reporting from the Anglo-Saxon sphere. That's for everyone else, like for reporters working for European media, that is basically a catastrophe, because we don't have Chinese reporting that we can base our stories on, that we can use as inspiration. If we talk about the Anglo-Saxon media outlets, in a way, they have also laid like a big share of the foundation on which correspondents for non-English speaking media, we have based a lot of our reporting on material from them. Because why? It's very simple. For example, New York Times, before the expulsions, they used to have 12 correspondents based in China. The Financial Times, not affected by the expulsions, but also decimated since COVID, they used to have 12 correspondents. The Wall Street Journal, I just double checked with the bureau chief, before 2019, they used to have 15 correspondents on the ground. So I think this kind of size for your Beijing bureau, that is appropriate for a country of the size of China, of the relevance of China, a country with that poses so many restrictions on journalism as China. The New York Times now has only one correspondent. They went from 12 to 1. The Wall Street Journal went from 15 to 2 correspondents on the ground. Basically, you can say a lot of the brilliant colleagues from the Anglo-Saxon media, they still do brilliant work based in Taipei, in Singapore, in Australia, or elsewhere in Korea, Japan. But they have very, very limited resources on the ground. And that is a huge problem for all of us, for me as well, I think for everyone, because the Anglo-Saxon media used to be able to do the scoops. They used to be able to do the in-depth reporting, to report on issues that other European media who have only 1 or 2 people on the ground, such as Die Zeit, for example. I'm the only person in China. We simply don't have the resources to do so. So both the collapse of the reporting of Anglo-Saxon media and also the death of Chinese media outlets that both impacted China coverage in almost everywhere, I would say. Mr. Bütikofer, then you raised a question, which is also very important. What do Chinese employees, our Chinese researchers think about these problems? Well, they are affected by the deteriorating working conditions way more than us. Steffen and me, I have a German passport since I'm 16. We can always leave the country. That's the worst that can happen to us. And many have done so in the last 2 or 3 years. Our Chinese employees on the ground, they can't. So we see way more harassment, like direct harassment towards them than, for example, I have experienced. Like, for example, the state security people would go to their house. There are cases where Chinese researchers have their families got harassed by state security people. We still have the case of the researcher from Bloomberg who has been in detention, secret detention, for more than a year now. And also Chinese researchers are way more exposed to online harassment than we are. They do get singled out with their photo, with their private information online. And of course, they do get attacked as traitors, as, collaborators with foreign powers, and so on. A lot of the most talented Chinese assistants that I know have also left the industry. Some went abroad. It's increasingly difficult to just hire help in China. That is another issue that makes reporting just really, really hard. I want to, if I may, just close my remark with one more aspect, something that I have not seriously thought about until I talked about it with a Dutch colleague this morning. I mean, it is quite obvious, but I think that also shows what kind of impact that dire situation in China has for the global reporting. So in many cases, Steffen, like for example, ARD, you have a bureau in Beijing, in Shanghai, but also you have bureaus in Tokyo, Bangkok, Singapore, and some other places in Asia, right?
Yeah, Bangkok,
okay.
Not that I know, but Singapore and Tokyo for sure, yeah.
Okay. I mean, and that is really the exception in the European media landscape, I would say. For example, I'm the only person in all of Asia. I'm theoretically responsible covering like half of the world population, 3.5 billion people. Of course, I'm not doing that because that is just madness. I cannot even keep track of what's going on in China. So basically, that just means whatever happens in Thailand, Japan, South Korea, Malaysia, Indonesia, and we all know that these are emerging economies, highly relevant to like what we call the rise of Asia in the 21st century. All these places simply don't get covered. I mean, what do we have read about the protest movement in Thailand since 2020? Those are the biggest protest movements in Thailand for a decade. There have been huge protest movements in Indonesia also. Yeah, how much have we read about the recent election campaign in South Korea, and so on? So a lot of European media outlets, similar as my paper, the Beijing bureau is the only bureau in Asia. Maybe there's one more in Singapore or Bangkok, but for sure the only bureau in East Asia. We cannot even cover China properly with 1 or 2 people. How are we supposed to cover the Koreas, Japan, Taiwan, and on top of that, Southeast Asia? It's impossible. And so now, if you take the travel restrictions, meaning we can't. A lot of my colleagues in Beijing, we have not left Beijing for a month. We have not left China for years. How are we supposed to cover Japan, Korea, Taiwan, and so on? It is impossible. That means like all the restrictions that we experience in China, they have a much more global impact also, just because we have so few resources in China, in East Asia, in all of Asia to begin with.
Well, thank you so much to both of you for sharing your experience and for giving us your insights. If you allow me, I will add a little bit information from a annual survey that had been conducted by the Foreign Correspondents Club in China in January. And that alerted me to the issue, and that basically motivated me to organize this webinar. And the Foreign Correspondents Club reported that 99% of foreign journalists that responded to the annual survey said that reporting conditions did not meet what they considered to be international standards. And then there is a breakdown of the experience, and I find this really shocking. 46% of respondents said their bureaus were understaffed because they were not able to bring people into the country. 52% of respondents said that they were told to leave a place or denied access for purported health or safety reasons when they did not pose any risk. 62% of respondents said they were obstructed at least once by police or other officials, and 88% of journalists who traveled to Xinjiang in 2021 said that they were visibly followed, and more than a quarter of respondents said that their sources were harassed, detained, or called in for questioning by police. So this is obviously what you have described is obviously not an extraordinary experience, but a broadly shared experience. Against that backdrop, I would like to ask first few questions. One question that I thought of while I listened to you is there still an opportunity for you, as when you work in China, to have a working relationship also with Chinese journalists, to find ways of cooperating or at least exchanging views with them? Or are these two worlds completely separated now? This is my first question. And then I would invite all the participants to also raise their hands and come in with their own contributions or questions. Please, who wants to address the first question?
Yeah, let me start, because it brings up some thoughts in my mind. The fact that I was part of this media ambassador program by the Robert Bosch Foundation, the lucky outcome, the great outcome was that I was actually very much in touch with Chinese journalists, with Chinese colleagues. However, since then, Xifan described it very well. A lot of these great colleagues left the industry. I don't know anyone who opened a tea shop yet, but people who used to work have been working for universities since then, or they left the country even, or started just a different career. Bottom line is, all journalists that I was in a friendly connection with, let's say, in a friendship connection with have disappeared, have left the industry. So bottom line is there's very few moments where I'm really in touch with Chinese journalists, because also when you have a press conference in China, press conferences in China have nothing to do with press conferences in Germany. You have to hand in the questions beforehand, sometimes 48 hours beforehand, which is ridiculous. You're not able to ask questions freely, spontaneously, and then you have Chinese colleagues who totally play this game. They totally, raise the questions that want to be raised by the state officials that are giving the supposed to give the answers. So bottom line is no, I have, and it's sad to say, but very few connections with Chinese journalists by now in the year of 2020.
Mrs. Yang?
Yeah, I have made similar experience. Most of the people I know, they have left the industry. Another anecdote maybe that I can tell, I recently got a call from a Xinhua colleague. Don't know how he got my phone number, but he just called me out of the blue and just asked, yeah, well, I just wanted to be in touch and maybe let's have coffee, and we just want to, make friends with people from, and I didn't have the time and chance to have coffee with that Xinhua journalist yet, but I thought it was curious that he reached out in the first place. In the past years, whenever I heard people from state media reaching out to foreign colleagues, it was mostly because they had something, a message they wanted to get across. It was not, more than often not, about like serious dialogue or exchange, but because they wanted to deliver some sort of message, which also often happens in Germany or in other European countries, right? The Chinese embassy, they reach out to different news outlets, want to have a chat with a foreign editor, or even the editor-in-chief. They even do invite foreign journalists.
They do that a lot, yeah.
Yes, exactly. But this is not a real exchange. This is not a dialogue. It's mostly like a one-way street kind of thing.
Okay, thank you. I have the first two questions in the Q&A. One question from Luc Scholtes. Luc asks, did the Winter Olympics allow to make any progress, or rather the contrary? And do we know if the IOC raised the issue with the PRC? And the second question is from Alejandro Pescador. Do you think that for the CCP Congress in coming October, the restrictions for foreign media could be even harsher? Would you start, Ms. Yang, please?
Yes. So the Winter Olympics, actually, we have seen, I think it even deteriorated during the Winter Olympics very visibly. I'm not sure whether some of you have seen the video clip that went viral a couple of weeks ago. One of my colleagues, the correspondent for Dutch TV channel NOS, he just did a live stand-up in the vicinity of the Olympic Stadium and was shoved out of the picture during a live broadcast because they said he didn't have the he didn't follow the rules. Other colleagues who just simply wanted to interview regular folks in Beijing on how they view the Winter Olympics, whether they are excited about ski competitions and so on, were told by security people, by street police, that you cannot ask people on the street about the Winter Olympics without prior, approval or whatever. We don't know what kind of approval they're talking about, because it's obviously against the rules. The rules in China are still, you can talk to anyone if he gives you if he agrees to be interviewed. During the Winter Olympics, I think the just seemed to me that the government became even more paranoid, and they just don't seem to have a sense that, I mean, this is basically harming China's image way more than so many other things. If you're not even allowed to speak to regular folks about their thoughts on the Olympic Games, and I would assume that, and in my experience, most of the people, if you ask them questions like this, they respond in a very positive way anyways. There are a few people who like openly criticize huge national events like that on the street. But if you're not even allowed to vent their positive energy, if I may quote like popular Chinese propaganda term, if they're not even allowed to vent their positive energy to foreign audiences anymore, I mean, what else? What can we report from China at all? The second question, I think I have missed.
Well, about the CCP Congress, would that possibly lead to even harsher restrictions?
Yeah, I mean, I personally don't even care about these kind of events anymore, because I mean, there is like a 70th anniversary, 100th anniversary, like a party congress, like 2 sessions, like Olympic Games. There's something like that every year, and so I mean, it just has been deteriorating year after year, and there's always like if you ask Chinese officials why they need to be so strict, they always say like, oh, this is like a sensitive period because we have that event and that Congress coming up. But I mean, yeah, it just seems like there's never an unsensitive period in China anymore.
But what you just said, Xifan, is exactly the point. The fact that Chinese officials use this term or these events to phrase something like, oh, this is a sensitive time, that leads to the very fact that it's much harder to get into China when someone leaves, like I just did, or colleagues of ZDF are now leaving, ZDF colleagues. It's very hard to get new people on the ground. These visa applications have always been very complicated when we talk about China, but in a time when these events, CCP Congress and so on, are on the agenda, it is getting more and more difficult to get in. Some of our colleagues have been waiting for more than 1 year to get the go to China. Not talking about the so-called temporary visa, J2 visa. I think, to my understanding, at the moment, it's absolutely impossible to get to do with these events. But as Xifan pointed out, this is mostly an excuse the officials bring up.
Then we have another question from Isabel Wisela Lima. She asks, would it be possible to elaborate a bit on the electronic surveillance of journalists, targeted and or in the larger spectrum of mass surveillance? And I also want to add one more question from my side. Have you found help in your work as journalists, for instance, with from European businesses or European representations or European foundations or other European players? Has there been serious effort maybe to help journalists in finding interlocutors and stuff like that? Who wants to start in?
Do you want to?
Yeah, okay.
Yeah,
First of all, the question that you just raised, Mr. Bütikofer, that comes up to my mind. Obviously, the European Chamber of Commerce, with their German president, Jörg Wuttke, is a very active stakeholder in the whole media circle, let's say. They have been both very willing and very good in bringing out their message. Sometimes I even feel they have kind of a monopoly when it's about critical voices, openly critical voices. That is also a problem if you only quote European Chamber of Commerce. Besides that, obviously, we have the diplomatic staff of the European Union in Hong Kong. I have made quite good experiences with them in Beijing as well, but not as tightly connected as like the German embassy staff, for instance. To the question of Isabel Wiesler Lima, well, basically, electronic surveillance is a thing that matters a lot, obviously, for us journalists, even more than to others. I have no proof, but I'm 100% sure that everything that I communicated digitally was read, was surveyed by the authorities, from a phone call to I don't know, obviously text messages and so on and so forth. This is something that we all know. Most of the journalists I know, me included, try to have two phones with, Chinese apps, Chinese messaging apps that you need to reach out to Chinese people, and like a so-called Western or home-based smartphone with really sensitive information where no Chinese app goes to. But still, I'm sure all emails, all text messages, to a certain degree, if they really want, can be surveyed. Yeah, that's obvious to me. And you see that last time I did a trip to Wuhan to after quite a while, to check out how the situation is after 1 year, I think, after the outbreak of the COVID-19 pandemic. Beforehand, we reached out through kind of sneaky ways to potential interviewees, and all of them, I think except one, so most of them in the last minute canceled the interviews. Oh, my grandmother is sick, or I have a dentist appointment that I forgot, or I cannot talk because I cannot talk. I don't want to talk to you anymore, which means our conversations with them before the actual working trip to Wuhan was overviewed by the officials, and these interviewees were told to cancel the interviews with us. So that means, obviously, if they really want to tap us, they do that.
You want to add, Mrs. Yang?
Yeah, I have made similar experiences recently. It all kind of depends also on the local authorities, how relaxed, how paranoid they are. Let me say that, for example, if I arrive in Shanghai or Shenzhen, I mean, I don't get a call by the police, and basically I haven't experienced that kind of surveillance in the biggest cities. However, if you go to smaller places, like 95% chance that a few hours after you check into the hotel, the police shows up at your doorstep. A colleague of ours, a German colleague, recently went to somewhere in Sichuan, to the mountains, and he was there for like 3 hours maybe, and there were 9 people from the local government showing up in front of his hotel room at 11 p.m. asking what is he doing, and so on and so forth. Basically, he and his researcher were forced to take the next flight back to Beijing. I had one of my more memorable trips from last years that went nowhere was I stayed in a different county on purpose to not get bothered, and I was planning to leave very early in the morning, take like a 2-hour drive to the next county where I actually wanted to do the interviews in a farmer's village. However, when we got there in the neighboring county, it was like 10 a.m. in the morning or something. After just half an hour, there was this like young lady in high heels, like walking behind us, shouting across the field, "Hey, I'm looking for you." And then turns out to be this young, very friendly lady from the local propaganda department who said, "Oh, we got like notice that you are visiting our village, and can we help you with reporting because you are strange to, I mean, you're strange to the area. You will get easily lost, and I'm sure we can be of big help." And turned out that so the local police from the county where we actually stayed, where we registered in the hotel, they came to our hotel, so we were not there, probably intercepted our phone, traced our GPS, then noticed the neighboring county officials, who then sent out this propaganda lady to look for us in the field, in the middle of the field. It was really in the middle of the nowhere, where we were just all of a sudden standing behind us. And after that, basically the trip was the trip was over. I mean, luckily I did like 2 interviews in that 1 hour after we arrived, before she walked up to us. But after that, basically, you can imagine there was not much we could do anymore. They funnily enough, it's almost comical sometimes in real life. I mean, of course, they won't tell you cannot work here. I mean, they do that, but in many instances, they pretend to help you. They pretended then, the propaganda lady then pretended to help us with arranging interviewees. But interestingly enough, all the interviewees that she tried to call, or at least she went away and fake called people, and she's like, "Oh, this person's not at home today. Oh, this other person is moving today. Oh, this person has a sick mom." And then it's like, "Oh, this is like really such a bad timing that you come today and no one is available to talk to you today." So that's often it happens like this.
Well, very graphic. Thank you for giving these examples. There are more questions. One by Leonard Landis. Well, he basically asked the question that you just responded to. How hard is it to find people willing to talk to you? Then Pascal Noufer, do you see that any kind of a reaction of foreign diplomats, the international community or so, could have an impact on improving the situation for foreign journalists? And I will add to that last question by Pascal, just hinting that on April 1st, most probably, we will have another EU-China summit between Chinese leaders and EU leaders. And I wonder if you could make a proposal, both of you, to European leaders to address the situation of journalists in China. What should they put on the agenda?
I mean, if I may answer this, there are dozens of things that come into my mind, but if I were to make like very pragmatic wishes that I think that European leaders can talk to Chinese regime about, and whether we could make maybe like a real progress here, is we should push for visa applications handled more quickly. I mean, we are still in a situation where it takes up to many months. I think last year the situation has improved a bit compared to the beginning of the pandemic. I mean, this is a very low bar, because some people have been waiting for their visa for like, I don't know, like 20 months or so. Steffen, you can maybe tell a bit more about how the visa process went on for your successor. But increase the speed regarding a visa application. And then I think we should also just also push for more reciprocity here, because I'm not sure how visa applications by Chinese journalists, who are mostly like reporters for Chinese media, state media, are being handled in Europe. But I suspect they get their visas much more quickly. We have this very difficult situation for many European media outlets. Many media outlets, they have job openings that cannot be filled for up to 2 years or even more, right? First of all, we have a visa issue, and then and that contributes to it. It's very hard to find people in Europe right now who want to go to China in the first place, who also are qualified, speak language, have the competence, and so on. That all adds up together.
There's one thing I would like to add, also to be a bit constructive here. It's very important to ask for better working conditions. It's in the interest of the journalists working in and on China have a better working condition, yes. However, it's very important to understand that a better working condition for Chinese correspondents is in the interest of the European public, decision makers, stakeholders, politicians, business people, regular people, you name it, because it's so important what goes on in China. If you look at Eastern Europe, Mr. Bütikofer, you know that. Let's talk about, I don't know, some bridge building project in Montenegro. Why did the government in Montenegro allow this thing to happen, to invest billions of euros for basically nothing, as far as I understand? Because the public over there obviously was not properly informed about what's going on in China. When we talk about the so-called One Belt, One Road project and about other things, about how Chinese government, how the Communist Party tried to influence decision makers in Europe. This should be on top of the agenda to understand why it is important to have proper reporters on the ground. I think this is very important. And I can just add on what Xifan said earlier said. Germany is the biggest country in Europe last time I checked, and considered itself to be the most important one. Yes, we have plenty of journalists there, but of course not enough. If you look at AFP, if you look at Reuters, if you look at Bloomberg, these news agencies, they have dozens of people on the ground. DPA, Deutsche Presseagentur, the most important German language agency, has 2 people on the ground. 2. That, I mean, you know.
Yeah.
Can I add to this? Because I was asking the FCCC colleagues for a breakdown of the numbers of correspondents we have for each country, and I will not give you the whole statistic, of course, but I mean there is quite striking. For example, many European countries don't have a single correspondent in China. Belgium has none. Greece has none. Then there are many smaller countries who have 1 correspondent. Austria has, for example, 1 correspondent from ORF. And then we have many Nordic countries, Czech Republic, Portugal, who have 1 or maybe 2 correspondents. I don't need to tell you why that's not enough. Also looking at the broader picture here, a lot of the Beijing correspondents double as not only East Asia, but all of Asia, plus Australia and New Zealand correspondents. And then, for example, also there's huge imbalances. For example, Netherlands has per capita has more China correspondents than Germany does. They have 8 correspondents. So Dutch media are doing a good job here, I think. Italy, which has more than twice the population of Netherlands, has only 4 correspondents. And I think we need to push for better working conditions in China, but we also, I think also European leaders, and there needs to be awareness, at least in Europe. We need to have a conversation about the structural problems of foreign reporting in general, about why Asia is so underrepresented in foreign reporting, and what we can do on our side to make sure the public gets better informed.
And just to let me add one thing, Xifan, just again to be a bit constructive, I see some good trends. for instance, Politico does a great on a daily basis, does a great job on China coverage from Brussels, because what I keep on telling my editors-in-chief in Germany has always been China coverage does not stop at the actual borders of China. China coverage is relevant in Africa, in Europe, in the US, in all over Asia, obviously, and you name it. So it's important to have the China angle also, or to open newsrooms up to the China angle also in Europe. And this is much easier than always bitching around about the horrible working conditions in China, and they are horrible, but we should also do a better job within German newsrooms, within German media organizations, especially in the public ones that I represent, to make sure that China coverage not only is done by the people on the ground in China.
Well, I think as we're coming to the end of this this webinar, I think I would want to pick up this last point that you both made. I mean, we started talking about the situation in which journalists have to do their job, and they are obviously very dire, but it's not just a problem for the journalists, nor is it just a problem for the media. I think it's a problem for all of us, because we learn less about China than we should. And we get less access, and we get less of a differentiated picture that we might want to have. And then maybe the gaps are being filled with Chinese propaganda material, because there is not enough original reporting that would answer the questions that people have. And I think there is really a public interest. This is not just an industry interest. This is not just a business interest. I think there should be a public interest in having more reporting, certainly also of the whole of Asia, but certainly in any case also of China, in order to not lose contact with what increasingly has become the epicenter of global development. And in a way, we're parochial if we don't invest more into listening and understanding and learning about it. So the work that you are doing and other correspondents are doing is really very important. And I want to thank you for doing that. And I also want to thank you for joining us for this hour to explain about your experience and to let people gain some insights in the kind of work that you're doing. So thank you both, Yang Xifan and Steffen Wurzel, for having been with us. And I wish everybody a very good remainder of the day. Thank you all.
Thank you,
Bye-bye.
Mr. Bütikofer.